Hi everyone, welcome to Your Mental Health with Karine, Rayson from the Crew Coach. We're talking about men and mental health this month, being Men's Health Awareness Month. And today I have the founder of Mocean. Very lucky to have you here with us, Brad. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. So we were talking the other day about community, and Brad has
Mhm.
an incredible platform that focuses on a community, and community means a lot to Brad. It means a lot to me. And I think when we talk about, both of us are entrepreneurs, and our core focus is on community because we believe there's something very, very special about community, and that is connection and inspiration. And working as a solopreneur can be so difficult because you're isolated. And that just adds a different layer to what we're about to talk about. So that's why I think both of us appreciate community so much and can realize the benefit surrounding yourself within a positive network. There we go.
Absolutely.
There we go.
Yeah.
So, Brad, tell me, what does community mean to you?
It's something I think about a lot, especially right now with COVID going on, like, being so isolated. I mean, I was isolated already as I, you know, embarked on this entrepreneurship journey 18 months ago. So I've been stuck in my box for the last 18 months, really not having much going on around me. But then obviously with COVID hitting, like I've just lost all community. Like I'm in Chicago and we're in lockdown right now. So, I don't see anybody. But thankfully we have this thing called the internet where I'm able to connect with people and have these conversations you know, through channels like Zoom. And what I've realized is, community it's really important who you surround yourself with, because things can get really lonely, but being able to channel access people and be able to you know fi- be able to talk through these issues and talk through this, not loneliness, but it gets like I over the last 6 months things have been really quiet and dark in here, just because I'm stuck behind my computer all day every day, and I don't get to go out and play sport and hang out with friends and go for beers. And what I've, what, yeah, I guess what I've realized is I didn't realize how important community was until I lost it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So, do you mean being a foreigner living in a new like city, town, country? Is that what you're referring to? Because
well, sure.
you're South African, and I don't know how long you've been
Hmm.
living in Chicago for, but it's very similar to yachting. Like you go on board a new boat and then you got to reintegrate and you got to find your way and your identity within that community. So was it similar to you?
Absolutely. So I've been in Chicago for a while now, so I've built up a little bit of a community. But when I first arrived here, my wife is from Chicago. That's why I'm here, and I didn't have anybody. And I come from a small town in South Africa where everybody knew everybody. And, the sense of community was, I mean, yeah, everybody knew everybody. You walk down the streets, everybody greeted each other. You stopped, you chatted with your neighbors. And now, like, I'll go out walking my dog and I'll see 10 people and not a single person will greet me, kind of thing, and
Yeah.
it's really challenging. But then you learn to find areas where you can find those people. So like if you look hard enough, you'll find them. And what I've found is I tend to hang out with a lot more foreigners, a lot more expats that come from similar backgrounds. So I have a lot of Australian friends, a lot of friends from New Zealand, and we all have like similar feelings about it. So we all tend to gravitate towards each other, and we've been able to find our own little community in
Mhm.
that. So yeah, so I had to start from scratch. But I feel like if you open your eyes, you'll find that community wherever you are. It's just a matter of looking for it and identifying.
Yeah, yeah. And with regards to men and mental health, what does that term mean to you? Because we spoke about self-care a couple of
Sure.
minutes ago. We're both
Um,
bad about self-care.
yeah. So I obviously grew up where like you didn't talk about your problems, or like, you know, mental health was never like, I didn't know much about it. To be honest with you, I still don't know too much about it. But over the years, what I've learned is it is something that needs to be discussed. People need to feel a little more open about talking about talking about it. Like, I don't know, there's a lot going on inside your head, and like you've got to get that out, and you've got to find people that you can, or channels that you can access to get relieve some of that stress and some of that tension. And um yeah, I mean, does that make sense?
It does. It does. So, in terms of, let's talk about South Africa. We're both South Africans. And what do you think the culture, our upbringing, when we talk about men expressing their feelings, what do you think the culture is around that, or the potential stigma attached to men being vulnerable?
Sure. I guess you just kind of grind it out. Like, if you have an issue, you just push through, and you know, like you yeah, I mean, I always, that's how I always approach things, was like, look, like if I had any issues, we would just push through and kind of get to the point where like it's no longer an issue, if that makes sense. So like if
Mm,
I had an issue with somebody on like the rugby field or whatever, like we would kind of pull out the fists and like, you know, but we wouldn't talk about it. Like so I guess that never happened in real life. It's more of an analogy, but like that's kind of how it was. Like you settle and you move on. You don't ever go back to it and address the underlying problem. You just kind of move on. um
yeah.
yeah, and it's, I guess in the short term, like that's kind of the easy solution. But in the long run, like if you hold on to that, like it's never going to end well, because those little things, they accumulate over time, and eventually, like that's where you see people breaking down, um, because they have all those minor
Niggles.
issues that just never get resolved, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I was going to ask you a bit about that, the consequences of suppressing your emotions and not really expressing how you feel. And you being a new dad now, congratulations.
mhm.
Um,
Thank you.
I think there's a lot more awareness of how we raise our children. So if you have, like, for example, your child, whether it's a girl or a boy that trips over and falls and starts crying, and you don't want to see them in pain, so you quickly pick them up.
Sure.
Don't worry about it, you'll be fine. And it's like, I'm hurting, I just want to cry. Let me cry.
Yeah,
And it's
sure, sure, sure.
from a young age that it's okay to feel hurt or pain. I know that's physical pain, but
Hmm.
not, it's just being mindful the words that we use, whether it's with our children or with our team or with our partner, not
Yeah.
saying things like, just get over it, harden up, you're a big boy,
Sure.
why, things like that we need to be very conscious of, and the impact on that, how that language can have on others.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, so it's good that you brought up my girl. Like, I think about this a lot now. So like, you know, there is that balance, and we're about to go through sleep training, and the idea behind that is let her cry it out, because she's become dependent on us, that every time she cries we go rushing to her aid. And like there comes a point where she has to, you know, she's doing it um just out of habit at this point. Like she can go a full night of sleeping without being fed, but she knows that when she cries we're going to come to her. So like we're busy, the thought of letting her cry it out is terrifying, because like she's my baby, and like I want to go and, you know, like I want to go rescue her. But there's got to be that balance where like you don't want to be that helicopter parent, and like, you know, she's got to figure things out for herself, and she's got to make those mistakes, and she's got to fall and pick herself back up. But at the same time, she has to know that we are there for her when, that she can always count on us being there for her. So yeah, so there is that balance of like, there, you can't cry over everything, but you also have to know that there are people that have your back, and that if you are in a tough situation, there are people that you should be able to call on and rely on to help you get out of it. You don't have to do it yourself and just kind of bury it deeper and deeper and deeper. Because at the end of the day, like, yeah, if you don't resolve the issue, and if you don't have that person that you can rely on and say, hey, dude, I'm in trouble, I need your help, like it never ends well. So I've been fortunate enough to have people in my life, like my brother and I, we talk on a daily basis, and like he's almost like him and I, he lives in Florida, and we both have our challenges, but we always know that we can pick up the phone and say, hey, like, Warren, I'm struggling with this, can you help me? And I don't have a ton of people like that, but I have a few close friends and a few close family members that I know I can reach out to and kind of and have them help me resolve my issues. And I never always had that. Like, there was a point in time where I was like, you know what, I'm just going to figure this out. I have, like, what are they going to think of me if I say, hey, dude, like, I'm struggling with this? Are they going to think I'm being weak, or am I being a girl, or whatever, but yeah.
This is so weird. I feel like you're reading my mind, because when I'm thinking about the next question, you're already like onto the next topic that I want to ask about. That's awesome. But what I wanted
Sure.
to say on that, what
Mhm.
point did you go, I'm actually going to put aside all my fear around asking for help, and I'm actually going to reach out? So, what was the breaking point for you to shift your thinking around asking for help?
So that's a good question. And, thinking about that, like, I still struggle to ask for help. And often it's because I don't, there's a couple of things. So, like, I feel like I'm inconveniencing somebody if I ask them for help, because, everybody's got their own shit to deal with. Excuse my language, but everyone's struggling with their own thing. So why should I, like, how can I expect them to help me through my own problems when they got to deal with their own things? And then it's also like, what, I don't know the questions. Like, I just blurt out and say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with? Like, how do you approach that? And I don't know. I think, so I'm 30 now. Maybe when I was in like my mid 20s, there was a point where I was like, things, I always had like this vision for my life, and I kind of knew where I wanted to be at certain stages in my life. And there were some areas where I maybe hadn't achieved what I wanted to achieve. And, I started reading a lot of books. And a lot of the books, they help you think through like questions, or, like, they kind of guide you. And I realized, some of these books maybe were giving me the answers, but I didn't really know, like, they weren't answering all my questions.
Mm.
Because like, a book is written for the masses, it's not written for the individual. And I realized, if I started asking people that had maybe achieved things that I wanted to achieve, and I started asking, how did they get there? And what mistakes did they make? And so that I could avoid the mistakes, or like, it kind of, you start asking these little questions of like, how did you achieve what you set out to achieve? And then you start getting comfortable, and you realize that people actually want to help. Like, people have a ton of experience, and they want to share it, because it makes people feel good to share knowledge and advice, right? And often the people that share that advice, they share it with people that maybe aren't interested in that advice at that given time, or it's not the right time. But what I realized is, if you start asking people questions, that they love to share their experiences. Like, and I do it too. Like, I've made so many mistakes in my life that, like, when people ask me, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, what are your thoughts? Because I've done it and I've achieved it. It's so awesome for me to be able to guide them in the right direction and say, look, you're going to run into these things, like, avoid these mistakes. So when I started getting comfortable asking people for advice, just in, like, mostly in business areas, then I realized, like, personal advice was also something I could ask. Like, all the answers are out there. Most things have been done before. So, like, you just got to figure out who the person is that you want to, like, who the role model is, and then be comfortable enough to ask them and, you know, share your issues and say, hey, you went through the same thing. How did you overcome this?
Yes. I've got so much joy in my heart right now. It sounds so corny.
Good. I mean, it's so true. And like, you know, I've heard so many people say what I've just said, and it sounds corny like saying it, but
Mm,
it's it's so true at the end of the day. I mean, and maybe I'm naive, but I do believe that most people are good and just want to share, you know, like there are clear paths to success, and people that have discovered those and have achieved success, like talking about yachts. So like I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of yacht owners who were willing to sit down and chat with me over, you know, like I've worked for some owners who would take the crew out to dinner and I'd sit next to them and share a glass of wine with them. And like
mm,
that's unheard of. But when you're sitting down with somebody like that and you say, hey, how did you get to this point where you can afford this yacht? Like obviously you don't phrase it in that way, but like they want to share everything and they want to tell you like every little detail of how they got there. And you know, you start to see like these similarities in, you know,
mm.
it's the same formula, but people want to share their advice. And when you get comfortable being able to ask like a billionaire, how did you achieve this? Then like you realize that, you know, questions, you should be asking the questions. You should, any person you meet, you should be asking a question to them. And like,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah,
I think the key message here is don't dismiss the power of curiosity, because I
absolutely.
you're curious, all the fear dissipates. And I've been fortunate enough not to feel intimidated by wealth, intimidated by prisoners. I just was curious. I was like, I want to learn more. And you start developing connections and a good rapport with people when you do tap into that curiosity. Because as you said, people
Sure.
love to share and impart because they feel heard and seen. And it's a
Sure.
basic human need. We all want to feel heard and seen. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But and like on that though, one of the things I guess that also held me back from asking questions was like I didn't want to come across as nosy. Like I, when I was younger, like we were always told, you know, like mind your own business. And, you know, especially when I was a kid and I was sitting at the table with grown-ups, like I was always told to be like, to be seen, not heard. And, you
Mm,
know, like there are people that ask questions for the wrong reasons and they are just being nosy and like, but there is a difference. And I didn't know that, like, I didn't know that you could be curious and ask the question without coming across as nosy, you know? So like, um I think that's something that I was had to overcome is like, you know, asking questions is okay as long as the intention behind the question is correct, if that makes sense.
mm. And another thing, because with my background in counseling psychology, what you're referring to there is a belief system. And so often
Yeah,
we see that as our truth, our reality. So, for example, mind your own business. Then we
yeah,
internalize it and go, oh, it's wrong if I'm curious, like
sure,
me being nosy. When in fact, it's the complete opposite. But that's why it's so important to check out your belief systems with others and say to them, like, look, do you ever think this or experience this? Because this is how I think and feel when
sure,
I've got this like intuition that's telling me that I want to ask something, but I feel like I can't because I feel like I'm being nosy. And that's when you start
sure,
having those healthy discussions and you can start debunking those faulty belief systems and create new ones that serve you rather than not.
right,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, and like just on that, like, you know, so when I was a kid, like I was really naughty and rebellious and like, you know, I questioned teachers all the time and like I never took things at face value. Like if you were telling me something, I would always question why. Like, and it became clear a lot of the time that like people say things, but they don't actually know why they're saying it, or like they they've read it somewhere in a textbook or whatever, but they don't actually know like the why behind it. So I've always been curious, but the common thing with like teachers, especially at a young age, when you question them, there's a difference between like tidy your room and you ask your mom why, versus like why is the earth round? Like when you ask a real curious question, but the teacher, for example, doesn't actually know the answer and they tell you to like, it's because I said so. When you hear because I said just so enough times, like you also, it kind of like gets ingrained in you, like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be asking these questions. And like, you know, and I think what makes good entrepreneurs is we do question everything. I'm constantly questioning, how can I make things more efficient? Like, why are things being done this way when like the clear path is it should be done this way, you know? But yeah, I mean, tying that back to mental health, like, you know, like I I didn't know the right questions to ask, and as I said earlier, so like I didn't know the right questions to ask, so I would always try and solve my own problems and kind of bottle it up inside because I didn't know who to ask and I didn't know what to ask.
Yeah.
And once you start getting good at asking questions, you kind of realize that old saying of there's no such thing as a wrong, like a dumb question. Well, when you start questioning, like when you have problems, it doesn't matter how you ask the question, as long as you can communicate what you're struggling with, the question almost becomes irrelevant because the person that you ask can kind of guide you through and help solve that issue, right?
Correct. Yes. And it's funny, we both know Holly, and Holly's
Uh-huh.
feedback because a lot of people ask her about counselling and what it's like. And there's so much fear around talking to someone because they feel like they don't know where to begin or what to say. And
Yeah.
it's just trusting that the right questions will come at the right time. And it's a
Hmm.
process of self-discovery in a more
Sure.
concentrated form. So you can go through life trying to figure out these answers yourself, and you might meander and take your time getting there. Whereas
Yeah.
therapy, you're definitely curious because you want to learn more and why you are the way you are. And I was like that as a little girl. I was like, there has to be a meaning behind this. There's a connection, and I'd unpack it.
Sure,
I
sure.
found it so fascinating, human behavior. It's so intriguing
Yeah.
to me. And yeah, like what we're doing right now is essentially like what we would be having in a counseling session. So I'd be asking open questions, and we've connected to belief systems that haven't served you, and then we might work on it on
For
a
sure.
level, but it's a concentrated experience in terms of reaching your fullest potential a lot quicker.
Sure. And that's whenever you and I, so like we've had multiple conversations. Obviously, we've never met in person, but whenever I'm done talking to you, I always feel like, so I've never been to therapy or any of that, but like you always like you do ask these questions where like at the end of it, like the conversation, I'm always like, you know what, I need to think about this because like clearly there's something here, and it's like there's often a lot of reflection after the call because you ask these questions that are, and like you bring out a lot of things in me where it almost feels like a therapy session, but it's a conversation, and it's like it's really interesting.
Mm,
And so where I'm going with this is like the beauty of this is like it's such a natural conversation, and I think that is key as well, to find somebody who you can have a conversation with like this where it doesn't feel like therapy. And yeah.
totally, totally. I think we need to rebrand the word therapy.
For sure. Yeah, I
So
mean there's definitely that stigma that is attached to that word, and like I think that's also what a lot of like maybe people are hesitant to maybe speak to other people, you know, and have a therapy session because there is like this weird like stigma behind it where like only people with serious problems go to therapy. um
yeah. Okay, I've got
yeah.
one last question for you. What
Sure.
was how can I frame this? The most memorable experience of reaching out for help and getting a positive result?
um this is kind of like, I don't know if this is answering the question, but this is what the first thing. So
Yeah.
I met my wife through reaching out. So I was coming to work at a summer camp in the States, and my sister was coming to be a nanny at the same camp, but she was going to work for the director. And she had never been abroad by herself before. So she said, can I come with her 2 weeks early? And I had no money. So I was kind of banking on arriving at this camp and then having accommodation and obviously food and lodge and all that, and then getting paid. So I agreed to come with her 2 weeks before, and I had nowhere to stay. So I reached out to my now wife, and I said I was friends with some of her friends, and I reached out to a bunch of people, and they couldn't accommodate me, and they were like, "Oh, reach out to Alex. She's like got this really cool house, really cool family. Like they'll take you in." So I reached out to her, and obviously the rest is history. So it was a thing where I had reached out to a stranger, just knowing that she was a good person, and my chances of actually finding accommodation would be higher. And like 10 years later, we married and have a kid. So like that was a thing of me taking a leap of faith and reaching out for help. And
Yeah,
so I don't know if that answers your question, but that
it
was the first thing that came to my mind.
absolutely does, because um, that must have been really tough in terms of like saying, "Hey, don't have any money. I can't
Yeah.
provide for myself. Can you help me?" Like,
Well,
it's the height of vulnerability right there.
yeah, I mean, it literally was that, because like I had worked at a camp a year prior in Texas, and somebody got fired at this camp in Michigan. So I did like a 3 week like freelance gig at this camp that my brother worked at. So I'd met Alex like a year before, but I'd met a few other people, and during that time they were all still in college, and the school that she was at was done early. So that's why I reached out to her. And yeah, it was super awkward. I mean, first of all, like I'm a guy, she's a girl. Like, why am I reaching out to her? But my brother was friends with her, and their family has like, they just like really cool people, and so like, yeah, it was super awkward. But I had nothing to lose. And that's another thing that I think people need to understand is like when you reach out for help, like the worst that somebody can say is no. Like if so you've got nothing to lose at the end of the day. So like don't be shy to ask for help. Because at the end of the day, like all that person can say is no, or I can't help you.
Yeah, totally.
Um, yeah. So
And
yep.
yeah, going back, that's such a beautiful story. You know what I would love? For us to pop through the door behind you right now with your baby girl.
I hear them. I don't know if you can hear Emerson just started crying, so she's obviously awake now.
Yeah,
But yeah,
anything. Um, yeah, maybe next time.
yeah, maybe round two, I'll text and say,
Yes,
okay, get ready. You should pop in.
that would be so lovely, so lovely.
Yeah,
And that's the other thing that you're touching on is the fear of rejection and how that can create a lot of anxiety which is a mental health issue. And being an entrepreneur, you've got to really be courageous because you are going to get rejected, but that's part of the process. And that's why I love that story about the KFC guy who tried to sell his chicken sauce
yeah,
and went to like thousands of homes and got rejected. And then he was like a multimillionaire by the time
for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think he only sold his recipe at like the age of 60 or something, or 70, like some crazy. But it's so true. Like you just need that one yes. I mean, like I hear no's every day. Um, it's part of the game. But when you ask enough times, like you're bound to get a yes at some point. So
Yeah.
persistence, especially as an entrepreneur, I think it's the most like undervalued characteristics. But persistence, yeah.
And consistent.
I know this conversation's gone all over the place, but
No, it
this
hasn't.
has been
It's
fun.
gold nugget. Everyone who's listening are going to be like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool!" So thank you so much,
Good.
Brad. I really appreciate your time.
Oh,
And
my pleasure.
how do people find you if they want to look into Mocean?
Can we like drop a link somewhere? I think that's the easiest way. I don't know when this is going to air, but by the time it does, we should be fully up and running and accepting people. So yeah,
Okay,
I'd love to connect over Motion. But yeah, I'll give you a link to share with
okay,
people.
perfect, wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been fun. Thank you, and thank you for everything that you do. Like, it's super helpful, and yeah, the community needs it. So
Aw,
yeah,
thank
you
you.
know, like it's a conversation rather than an interview. Like, when I was interviewing for jobs, like the thing that I hated the most was like I knew what questions were going to be asked, and like I'd prepared an answer, and like, and like I think that when I get to the point where I'm interviewing people, like I want it to be a conversation. Like, we all know, like, oh, so what's your biggest weakness? And like, and everybody has like these scripted things, and it's like just give me the real stuff, like. And that's what this whole conversation was. It was like I had no idea where it was going. Like, when I sent you a message yesterday saying, "Can I prepare for it?" You're like, "No, just like be yourself." Perfect, because that is the most authentic. Like, I love it. And so talking to these prisoners, like, what's because I knew, I must have read it somewhere. I know that you spent some time, like, working in a prison. What were you, like, coaching, counseling? Like, what was the and like what kind of prisoners were you talking to?
So I got offered a job 2 years before finishing my degree. I don't even know how
Okay,
I was offered a placement before not acquiring all that knowledge. And
sure.
I thought, oh my God, this is definitely not me. I wanted to work with children. And I was like,
Okay,
these are like the complete opposites. And there were men,
sure,
and I didn't want to work with men for some reason. I think I felt intimidated. I don't know. Anyway,
sure.
I read the book Marching Powder a few years prior. And
Okay,
I remember reflecting, thinking, my word, they're like normal people. This is
sure.
interesting. And I'm like, I wonder if they are born bad or is it life experiences? Anyway, park that. And then
Hmm.
that when I got offered that placement, that memory came back. I was like, maybe there's something here. And I was like, Karine, you know what? If you want to be the best at what you do the hardest job. Just get
Yeah.
out there and do it. And I was like, okay. So had my textbooks, I had everything. I was sleeping next to my textbooks because I was hoping that I could wake up at 3 a.m., read a couple of pages before presenting the next day. I
Sure.
suffered from imposter syndrome. And I remember clearly the very first group that I ran with a co facilitator. And I didn't sleep well the night before because I'm just thinking, okay, what am I going to teach? I hope I get it right. And before going into the room, my co facilitator said, here's your duress, which is an alarm button. And if
Hmm.
anything goes wrong, just press that button and security will come. Just make
Wow.
sure you sit at the door so we can run out in case something's going to happen.
Sh-
I was like, say what? What? Like, I've got to remember
yeah.
the information I need to teach and I need to worry about my safety. And I was like, so much was going on. And I remember probably the first 2 weeks when I'd get home from work, I couldn't talk. Like nothing would come out of my mouth because I was in a state of shock from the story
Sure.
I was hearing.
Oh,
And
I can imagine.
a lot of them were, I was so naive. Like a lot of them were intoxicated on drugs in therapy, in group therapy. So
Okay.
how it looks, what my role was psychoeducation, so delivering content on, say, mental health or how to communicate, anger issues, domestic violence, all sorts of topics. And then we'd do
Hmm.
process work where we had to unpack things. And then I would have a caseload of, say, 10 to 15 clients that I would see privately one on one. I didn't have time to be honest, to really even drink water. It was like back to back, and I'd have to drive an hour and a half one way to get to work. One day I fell asleep at the wheel because I was so burnt out and so tired. I hadn't
Jeez.
blink. I told myself, just have a long blink at the traffic
Yeah.
lights, and I was knocked out. Like fell asleep.
Wow.
I didn't have my handbrake up, so I rolled into someone else, and which was like just a light bump. Nothing happened.
Hmm.
Wake up call. I'm like, I need to move because this is too, the travel and everything else was too much. But going back to that first session, I remember his name was Daniel Dimitrovic. and he was massive. So if you can think of the Addams Family and the butler, that guy
Yeah.
looked very
Yeah.
similar to that.
Okay.
And he was likely, I think he was withdrawing from drugs. And he said, Karine, can you just put your book down and just talk to us? I was like, what? And that for me was so powerful because all they were looking for was connection. No one,
Yeah.
and it's the same with presentations and doing courses. I've done so many courses, I've attended so many lectures. There's nothing worse than download. And people want to have an experience like what we had in this interview. And I think that's so important when we can bring lived experiences into the room and then apply the theory and make sense of it.
Right.
So I've worked across Australia at different prisons from minimum to maximum security. In terms of like some of my naivety and some of the stories that I heard, we had to urine test them, not
Yeah.
testing, but security guards, and they would be using drugs but producing clean urines. And you think, how is
Okay.
that possible?
Yeah.
So, um, if you don't want to hear this, people plug their ears.
No, no, tell me.
They would get a syringe and use someone else's clean urine and shoot it up their own urethra.
No ways.
Yeah. And then
Wow.
pee it out. And that's how they would produce a clean urine. Um, the addiction to drugs was so intense that they would get something called bupe that was administered to help with withdrawals. So if you were a heroin addict, you would have bupe. I'm pretty sure. It's been a
Hmm.
while, so maybe it's not correct, but I'm pretty sure. Anyway, it's a type of drug. And they would have to have their teeth checked, the cavities checked, because they would push the drug in the cavity and maybe use a bit of gum to block it, or they would ingest it, vomit it up, and strain it through a sock and sell it.
Wow.
Mm.
That like that is crazy. And like so I've had some friends who've like had drug issues, and like you hear stories like this and you think of I don't want to call like creativity often is, but like it's creative, and it's like imagine if these guys channeled it in the right direction. Like
Absolutely. Totally. I would have
yeah,
conversations with them about it all the time. Like they would blow my mind. They would make these apparently like these beautiful fish patties. And I'm like, how? How when
yeah,
you have a stove? But they would make a plan. They would like get the electrics and like it was incredible. And
right.
one, I should have written a book. I really should have, because now I remember all the stories. But I remember in one of the last jobs I had in maximum security, and it was the most depressing place I've ever been to. After a week, I just burst into tears. I didn't see a blade of grass at the whole time at work. It was just concrete
Yeah,
and like a cage. And I saw this weird thing. Oh, it was toilet paper just floating like the horizontally across all the windows of the cell. And I'm
yeah,
like, there's something up here. And if I could have multiple careers, another one would be to be a detective. Like I'm so
yeah.
good at spotting who the criminals are out in the public.
Sure,
And
sure.
I'm like, nope, something's going on here. So next day when they came in, I said to the sweeper, who's like the cleaner, and I said, now I saw a piece like toilet paper floating across the cells. Tell me what was going on there. And he was like, oh, it was a drug drop. So when the wind's right, the paper will float in the direction that you want it to go in. They stick the drug at the end of the toilet paper, and the person who needs to get it will stick their hand out of the cell and scoop up the
Yeah.
toilet paper to get the drug.
Oh wow.
What they also do is make a parachute out of the toilet paper roll,
Hmm.
and then they can float it up and the wind will catch it and they would get it that way.
Amazing. Like you think of like the physics involved in that. Like these guys could have been like geniuses, you know? Like I mean that's I remember reading, I don't know if it was like Nelson Mandela's book or whatever, but I remember how they would communicate when he was in on Robben Island. And like they would cut I think they would cut like holes in a tennis ball and they would send messages like and you know like when I was a kid I was fascinated with prisons. Like I remember once we were in Cape Town and we drove through Pollsmoor. Like we just drove through the perimeters. Like we were able to get through security. Like the boom was just open.
Oh my
And I remember driving through Pollsmoor and just being like fascinated and like me and my buddy James, we were like hanging out the windows and like you could hear the prisoners and like it was pretty scary, but like I've always been fascinated with like prisoners. I don't know why, and like drugs and all of that. And it's just like, yeah, and I often wonder what like what went wrong and if these guys and girls had stayed on like the right trajectory, what could have been. Like
yeah,
it's did you ever read that book by Steve Hamilton called I Want My Life Back?
no.
Um, I don't know when you left South Africa, but when I was like 13, so like I don't know, 2003 maybe, he came to our school and he was like this druggie who had managed to get clean after like 30 years of like heavy abuse. And he wrote a book called I Want My Life Back. And you know, he was in and out of different prisons and obviously like he spent a lot of time in Durban and like actually all over the country and just reading his stories and like you know reading like his accounts of like meeting you know 13-year-old girls and like kids that were just hooked on the heaviest stuff and it's just like it's so fascinating but also like just like some of the stories that he told you can't help but think like if these people came from the right homes or never had whatever trauma they went through like
It's
what could they have been, you know?
trauma. A lot of their belief systems are I'm not good enough, I'm a failure. And they've been told that they're a failure all their life. So they think, what's the point? And so then, there's nothing to lose. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it is, I really do wish I could have written a book about it because
Jeez.
it's so powerful. The What shocked me is the blue versus the green. So our uniform, the prisoners here wear green, the blue are
Okay.
officers, and the abuse of power. It is disgusting, disgusting.
Can imagine.
My heart. Um, they get picked on by the police when they're on parole. They
Hmm.
get picked on because the officers know who they are, intimidated, shamed in public, all of that sort of stuff. And one of the heartbreaking stories I can tell you was an 18-year-old first time, and his mum was an addict and would sell drugs.
Hmm.
And he he would call his mum every single day at the same time. There's routine, like on yachts, there's a sheet day,
Hmm.
and he brought his sheets down the wrong day. He's new
Hmm.
when we make a mistake. The officers locked him in his cell as punishment to teach him a lesson.
Yeah.
Mum died that morning and he didn't get to call her for Mother's Day.
Oh man.
He was crying, obviously, his eyes out. And I've got
Yeah.
goosebumps talking about it as a poor thing. Like, how horrible is that? Awful.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's comes from both ends. The prisoners stand over each other. So I've got a lot of stories about that as well. And one of my core values is fairness and justice. And there was
Yeah.
a point I realized, and you'd identify with burnout, and I even picked it up a couple of days ago. I was like, okay, I'm recognizing the signs you're burning out again. But I had one client who did the right thing and got put into segregation because you just have to keep them safe, and that's the best way to keep them safe. But it is, you put in a little box, not big enough for a dog even, and
Hmm.
he was losing weight. He's like, Karine, I'm going mad in here. I can even tell you what time it is by looking at the sunlight on my floor. And he said it's 3:30. It was
Wow.
3:30 in the afternoon. And
That is crazy.
he got stood over for his pair of shoes. Like, it's all about the kicks in prison. And he told someone that if he got let out of jail, the person could have his shoes. He didn't get released, so he kept his shoes. The bully stood over another prisoner to king hit him and knock him out. He got hit and he just didn't respond. He didn't hit back. He did the right thing, but he got put into isolation. And I'm like, this is making me sick. This is not fair.
Yeah,
And that's when I pulled the plug and I'm like, I'm out. Can't do this
that
anymore.
is, yeah, I mean, I I really like what you just said about like your values, because yeah, I mean, this world isn't fair. It should be. And like it's just like I don't understand, especially people that are in power, how they abuse it. It's like, I mean, I see we all, like every government is the same. Like they all just take advantage of people. And like, I mean, it's just like, it's so crazy. Like prisons in the US at least aren't designed to rehabilitate. It's like it's a business, and it's like people just get exploited. And like like it makes me sick to think that like people should, they should pay their debt to society and then be done with it and kind of move on, get rehabilitated. And but when like you hear all these stories about people going to prison for minor things like possession of marijuana,
Yeah.
and they come out hardened criminals. And then
Yeah.
like like I can't understand it. But then you hear stories like this, and when you're exposed to that stuff all the time, and when you are being, when somebody is like dominating you and forcing you to do things that under normal circumstances you wouldn't, but in order to protect yourself you're going to do these things, like
Mm.
it eventually becomes a lifestyle. And then like there is that switch that happens where people go in as one person and come out another. And it's like, it's,
I agree with that. Like, I think they would
yeah,
get worse, and that's why it's a revolving door. We don't have
yeah,
space for people with mental health issues, so there would be people that should not. There was a disability. It was called the disability unit, and
hmm,
it was people with severe mental health issues, but yeah, probably cognitive impairments.
sure,
And for example, one would have a teddy that he would take around with him and sit into group meetings. And I didn't work in that unit. But for example, when the therapist was asking questions, he would say, Teddy, what do you think? And I'm like, that's not a place for a person to be in prison.
sure, yeah,
And what was really funny though, our unit was opposite that unit. And they smuggle drugs in prison through various ways. And the disability unit said they had some drugs on them. And so our unit stood over them and said, okay, bring it over, throw it over. And what they
mhm.
did, it was a joke through the prison, like everyone was laughing about it. The disability unit grated carrots and put it in tinfoil and threw it over.
Oh wow.
So they got flagged, stumped.
Yeah, well,
the stories, oh my gosh. But anyway, so I had one guy got called by an officer saying, please, can you talk to him? We can't understand him. I went to see him. He doesn't have any family, and he asked me if I could represent him in court. And he apparently needed to be tucked um, in bed every night, and the lights switched off for him. And the officers wouldn't do that. Like, there's not a chance. But he was put in
yeah,
segregation because he got angry towards an officer, and he was probably provoked. And he said, Miss, I promise I'll be a good boy. I won't hurt anyone. I won't say anything to the officer. I just want to go back. Please, please, can you help me? And I'm just thinking, my God, this is so unfair. So unfair.
yeah.
Uh,
Wow. Well,
mm,
I have like a million questions, and I know that you are insanely busy. I just wanted to ask one more question because like
Yeah.
so Alex's mom, she deals with a lot of like trauma victims. She's a psychologist, psychiatrist. I always get them mixed up, but and I'm always like fascinated, like how so it's got to be traumatizing for you having to hear all these stories. Like, how do you deal
Mm,
with that? Like, I mean, like, because just thinking about this, like, I don't even know like a quarter of, like I can only imagine what you've gone through, but like that's got to be traumatic hearing these stories day in and day out, and like what are some ways that you cope with that stress?
um, so firstly, I think if I was working with abused children, I wouldn't cope. I wouldn't survive. So
Sure.
I told myself that they've made their bed and they've got to lie in it. They're adults and they've made
Hmm.
choices. They've made the wrong choices in life. Um,
Sure.
a piece of advice from the head of security in my last prison, he said to me, Karine, don't think you can fix everyone here and all their problems because you can't. If you
Sure.
planted a seed, you've done a great job. And I was
Sure.
like, wow, because honestly, it was comorbid issues. Like it wasn't just one, it was thousands of issues. And I'm like,
Sure.
how, there's not enough time. How am I going to fix everyone? There was a lot of pressure.
Sure.
But another thing, I think it must be my brain's way of coping, but I can't remember the details of things. Like I think it's like a switch, and my brain goes, this is too much. I'm not going to retain this information. It doesn't serve me.
Sure.
But energetically, yes, it would impact me. And then I suffered
Hmm.
from vicarious trauma. So that's not like first-hand trauma, it's secondary
Yeah.
from hearing the stories. And it caught up with me 3 years later. So I had
Okay.
clients that passed away from drug overdose, and I started like hearing his voice. Not, I'm not psychotic or anything like that, but
Sure. Sure. Sure.
his smile and laughing. And I got invited to his funeral, but I couldn't go because of work, and we were so busy. And
Hmm.
it's that, I think. But we've got a setup to take care of ourselves. So as clinicians and therapists, we have to go to therapy, and I have to present my cases to my supervisor. We have debrief and
Okay.
process work. So we
Yeah.
do a lot of work to protect ourselves.
Sure.
Hmm. But
I ask because I was always that friend that like everybody always told me their like deepest darkest secrets, and there are things that like I carry with me that like I've never shared because it's not my secret to share.
hmm.
And there are things that kind of like weigh on me, and it's not like I struggle with this every day, but from time to time like it kind of resurfaces, like something triggers it, and I like think about like the secret that I'm carrying with me. And like I don't really have like I've never shared it, as I said, like it's not my secret. Like Alex and I talk about everything, but there are a few things that like I just want to talk to her about because it's not my place to share. um and it's just like it's not something that I battle with every day, but from time to time like they do resurface, and it's just like it's difficult to kind of push it away, if that makes sense. And like
Mm,
it's not something where I feel like I need to go and like talk to somebody about it.
really?
But maybe but maybe that's me like being in denial, like maybe
If it
I
keeps
am being a bit of a
recurring,
hypocrite.
well, yeah, if it keeps
Sure.
recurring, I think it's a sign that you do need to do work around it and process it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's yeah. I mean
Mm.
yeah. But this, just like that aside, this has been really cool. I thoroughly enjoyed this. So thanks for like pushing me to do this. I
No,
was a little nervous, but like stoked that we made it happen.
no, my pleasure. And I think right now we're both sitting in gratitude, and this is my one of my favorite stories I like to share about prison, with this guy that was looked like a Buddha, and he was just round, chubby, plump, and just smiling all the time. And I'm like, how is this dude smiling? Is he on drugs? Like, it's not possible. This place is hell, living hell. And I was like,
Yeah.
I've got to ask him. He must meditate. Like, that's the only way. And I said,
Yeah.
Henry, why are you smiling all the time? And he's like, I'm just happy, miss. I'm just happy. And I'm like, why are you happy? What is there to be happy about? You got the death penalty. Then you got life sentence in jail in China.
Mhm.
Then you got 20 years and you've now been in jail for 17 years. You got sent back to Australia. I said, how are you still smiling? He's like, miss, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful to be here. Now, that's a good way to end the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love it. Well, have a fantastic day, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
I look forward to our next session.